It's
all the best stories are.
It's a hybrid. So
If you're going to go that way, then that's the way.
Good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. And remind everybody that we are being live streamed this evening. So welcome everybody to this interim council, and a special welcome to our Police and Crime Commissioner, Matthew Barber, for coming here this evening. I was looking at the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner earlier, and it does show that the person should be the voice of the people and engage with communities. So I really appreciate you engaging with us here this evening. I think you have been shown sent copies of some of the questions. You will be the first on the proper agenda, but we've got just a couple of items first. No members of the public other than our guests. Thank you. Any apologies for absence? Councillor Chafer, thank you. Can we receive those apologies from the council? Yeah. Any declarations of interest at this stage? No, thank you. So our honoured guest, Matthew Barber, is here to answer some of our questions and hopefully give us some insight into the current issues facing Thames Valley Police and the Police and Crime Commissioner at this time. But perhaps if we, is it okay if we start with the questions? Thank you. Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Commissioner. Thank you for coming. I originally raised these two questions that were put to your office about what we consider to be a waste of taxpayers' money in pulling out of this equipped IT investment, and secondly, about us being involved in the consultation about the closure of police counters. We put these questions in September 21, and it took, as you know, till the middle of this summer to get a reply, and I have seen the response from the Buckinghamshire Council's policing committees. You have partially answered the one about the IT investment. I do understand it was your predecessor, Commissioner Stansfeld, who was involved in that. And you have explained at some length about how you're going to avoid future catastrophes like this, the £14.4 million of our money being wasted in this at a time that you'd come to us just before the elections asking for our precepts to be raised so you could get more officers, and that's what really grated the town of Buckingham. The second question, which you haven't answered in your response to Paul Hobson, our then town clerk back in May, was about the closing of police counters. You've gone to a great deal of trouble to say you want to involve Buckingham in neighbourhood policing, which is the policy all over Thames Valley now. But by closing police counters, you're not neighbourhood policing, because a lot of our residents aren't the sort of people who have access to internet or mobile phones. They're people who need to know where they can go when they need something. And I did raise the point. We asked what the latest situation was, and you hadn't answered at that time, given that you held a consultation, the result of which you yourself noted 51% were against you closing counters. Only 49% in favour. Let's just put that in perspective. Brexit, 52% of the population wanted out, 40% in. We left Europe. Last week, the Brazilian president was knocked out with a 51% against 49% vote, which is exactly what your counter-closure vote is. So could we ask why the residents of Thames Valley, having said we don't want them closed by a majority, why you went ahead and still did it? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, firstly, apologies that it's taken so long to get here, frankly, because I'd much rather have been able to attend in person to answer some of those points myself. If I can recap slightly over the equipment, it's been answered, but I think it's probably for the benefit of it. I won't bore everybody. I'm more than capable of talking for your whole meeting, but I'll try and give a quick run through of what was surmised. I suppose I would completely agree. I think You posed the original question as asking me to justify that. I mean, I can't justify it. One, I wasn't the Police and Crime Commissioner at the time. Secondly, I have said very publicly on the record that it is an awful situation to be in, and I cannot justify it. We have put changes in place to mitigate against it. There is an important distinction which I will come on to in the second one, which is the operational policing is responsible for the Chief Constable. I then hold the Chief Constable to account for delivering them. The IT venture itself is an operational matter, and it's only the Police and Crime Commissioner to manage the finances and hold the Chief Constable to account for. That distinction is important because it's actually part of the remedy. But I think one of the issues that was raised, and after I took office, we've had two reviews, one into the specifics around the EQUIP programme carried out by the Joint Independent Audit Committee, and a second one into the governance arrangements, which I've presented the results of to the Police and Crime panel. Part of the issue was actually that the confusion, the conflation, if you like, of those two, who is responsible for what, and actually ensuring that the operational responsibility is very clearly in the ballpark of the Chief Constable, freeing up the Police and Crime Controller to account for that. But I make no excuses for that previously. On the front counters, again, the conversation was conducted by Kent Valley Police as opposed to the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner again prior to me taking office. The 51%, if it were, I think the comparison with Brexit is an excellent rhetorical point. But of course, one was a referendum, which was legally binding, the other was a consultation. And I think in total, across the 2.6 million people across Thames Valley, I think less than 100 people responded to the consultation, of which I cannot deny 51% said that they wanted to remain, but not necessarily a representative sample. Now, there's probably a question there about how we get more engagement in the consultations, slightly separate point. I think the reality is that front counters are rarely used by the public, and they are expensive. They are not to be confused with police stations. Separate arguments will remain about police stations, but the front counters themselves are very rarely used, and they are an expensive piece. The front counter will require several people civilians usually on a rota. There'll be the heat and light and all the bits that go with them. Frankly, I would rather put that money into frontline policing. That not everybody will agree with, but actually, it's one of those issues where we have to look at how we live our lives differently now. I entirely accept, and I might come on to talk about some of the ways I think we can employ technology much better. But I entirely accept not every member of the community will use that. Policing, unlike an Amazon or a Tesco's, have to provide a universal service to absolutely everybody. But the front counters, as they existed at the start of 2021, did not provide a universal service to everyone anyway, because some people already have found that they were too remote from where those front counters were. Some people have always been too remote from where a police front counter was. The reality is, if the public need help, use the telephone. And I would rather make sure that our resources go into providing the help the public needs, rather than providing an effectively bureaucratic service for a tiny minority of people who would remote.
Thank you very much. You didn't respond to that in any way?
No, thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Barber.
And thank you very much. Our third question is from Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, and welcome from me as well. It's good to see you. Just for the record, the referendum wasn't legally binding, but that's not the story. My question is, because I can get with lots and lots of people in the town, and lots of people say to me that they never or hardly ever see a police officer or PTSO, which just adds to the fear of crime. And makes them question why they are paying council tax for what appears to them to be an invisible purpose. So my question is, I mean, just a bit of background. A couple of weeks ago, there was a stabbing in the town. A young man, you probably heard of this, I'm correct. A young man was stabbed by another young man, both Buckingham people. Fortunately, the police have arrested the perpetrator, and the other young man who was in the hospital, so I understand. But nonetheless, it sent shockwaves through the town. I don't know anything like that's happened before, but certainly it was a very scary thing for people to have on their doorstep. So I guess my challenge is, what is your strategy? I mean, maybe something you're working on with the chief, I appreciate that, to provide our local residents, because we're obviously very concerned with people here in Buckingham, the psychological security of feeling that there is a real police presence in the town. I've noted that in the last few weeks since the stabbing, the number of patrols have gone up, and they put that on social media and so on. But I've done my best to put that out there as well. But I think we want something in the long term. We could talk much more. I've talked about time for this evening about how you go about doing it. Let me just know what you're showing.
Certainly. Firstly, apologies for not standing, but I'm conscious that I'm probably get a great view of the board on the back of my head if I do. So, yeah, I can happily talk about the issues around knife crime specifically, which is an issue close to my heart. If you wish, but I think it's a slight distraction from the area you really want to get to, but happily come on to it if we've got time. You're quite right. What I think is really at the nub of your point is as much about the perception and the feeling of safety as safety itself. And I think it's, although it might be rather anachronistic, in policing, I often refer to the Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing, the 9th being that the effectiveness of the police force will be measured by the lack of crime as opposed to the effectiveness of the activity going on in catching criminals. I think that in some ways is what we really should be looking for here. We want long-term reductions in crime, what will make people feel safe, as well as some visible presence. I think both are important. I'll come on to why. There is indeed a strategy that I am working on at the moment with the soon-to-be new Chief Constable, subject to confirmation by the Police and Crime Panel. It's a culmination of several pieces of work. The main one, the obvious thing to cite, is around officer numbers. We have more police officers in Thames Valley than we've ever had before. That is a very good place to be. There is an issue about where they are organised. I don't just mean where they are geographically, I mean where they are organisationally. There is a challenge with new officers coming through training because of the new training regime that is in place. We've had some paper media dialogue about this. The training regime that's in place means that they have more protected learning time and therefore are not on the front line as much within that first period. The training goes from a 2-year period to a 3-year period. That impacts a little bit on the short-term visibility and impacts on neighbourhood teams who are being used to backfill some of those new recruits. Now that's a bit of short-term pain. I don't deny the pain, but it's also one of those humps that we just have to get through. There is no amount of money is going to change that. It's not about resource, it's about an organisational challenge we have at the moment in history that we just need to get past. And as we get into the new year, we will start to see the Sunday uplands as we get out of that. So I think that's one point around the training. There's also a where are they in a wider force review. So one of those things that policing has done to itself in many ways over the years is around the creation of teams and squads. Squads are less in fashion, but teams and task force very much in fashion. And all created for the right reasons. I wouldn't, just for the clarity, I wouldn't suggest in what I'm about to say that we should do away with the specifics I'm mentioning, but good examples are, we've seen issues around child sexual abuse have become more to the fore in the last decade or so. So we've created child abuse investigation teams. Domestic abuse is taken much more seriously, quite rightly, than it ever was before. So we've created domestic abuse investigation teams. But as soon as you create a team, where do those people come from? They come from what would have been responsible for neighbourhood policing in the past. And there are 50, 60 individual decisions that have been taken over the last 10 years, admittedly, with a backdrop of at the time declining numbers. But as we get to that point where we are now of more than ever before, you have to look back and say, well, where have they all gone over time? And it's partly, not entirely, but partly because little teams have been created here and there, and we need to. Although those individual decisions were right at the time, they weren't taken strategically well, where do we all need to be? So part of that is taking a step back and seeing where those numbers are and where they should be. For me, they ought to be in community policing, neighbourhood policing. That at the moment we have around 1.5 times the number of uniformed officers in response to what we have in community policing. I would like to turn that round, not by reducing response necessarily, but by making sure that all of that increase goes into community policing. So we end up with, roughly speaking, 1.5 times the number of officers in community policing than we have in response. Because that's about moving to prevention. That's about partly providing that reassurance, which is really another of your question. I'm not ignoring the question. That increase in visibility and activity, and it's activity as well as visibility, will provide some reassurance. But it also, because it's proactive, will prevent crime, which means you don't need proportionally as much in response policing, because you're dealing with the antisocial behaviour by those young lads in the park, which is only on the cusp of criminality, if it is at all, but you're dealing with it at an early stage in partnership with the local authority, rather than waiting until it escalates into violent instances that response teams need to deal with. Now, of course, that's not a perfect science, because those individual young people that you might be trying to intervene with won't necessarily be the exact people who will cause the issues, but we know that there's a correlation, and that early intervention can be really effective. So it's about turning the big supertanker of policing around from, we've got ourselves very much into a mindset of response policing. I mean policing as the mindset of a lot of police officers through the ranks is we're busy, we're rushing around, we're doing online stuff. And that's hugely important. You don't ever get to put your foot on the ball in policing and say, well, stop doing that, we're now going to do this. That's why it takes some time. But I think there are things we can do. So we will be not just at our Home Office target for recruitment by the end of the year. I'm hoping that we will overachieve on that. I'm not going to put a number to it. I have got a number, but I know that if we overachieve by 30, that would be a good result. But if I've told you we'll overachieve by 40, then 30 looks like we failed. So we will at least meet our minimum. Anything that we overachieve is going to be funded by the Home Office for year one, but not onwards. So people services and the force would like to see us use that to manage with attrition over the next couple of years. My view is, no, we need to be looking to see where I can fund those additional posts that we can overachieve on for years 2, 3 and onwards. That will give us an immediate overachievement on our forecast numbers, which we can put into community policing. Now, the numbers aren't going to be vast. Suddenly you're going to see squads of high-vis jackets on the streets of Buckingham, I'm afraid. But it is that part of the journey in turning the supertanker around and making sure that those new recruits are actually going into neighbourhood policing rather than just going in and doing their time in response and then off into whatever specialism they wish to see. So that's one area. The other thing is looking at areas where we might be overstaffed. So there are certain specialisms within policing that we probably have more officers in Thames Valley than Surrey, Sussex and Hampshire combined. We're a big force, but we're not that big. We need to cover our plot accordingly. So there are certain areas where I think we can maybe step back from some things in order to say that community policing is what really matters. So we'll put the numbers into it. And I've long said that once we get past that Home Office recruitment, we clearly need to continue to recruit because there will always be people retiring and leaving the force. But we need to at least recruit to, as a minimum, keep pace with our population growth. So if we can put that extra growth into neighbourhood policing to kickstart that, we need to continue to grow. And in my view, that growth, in absolute numbers, should all be going into community policing because they are most affected by the increase in population and are best served by that. The third bit of the strategy, to bring around, I probably would have listed on a bit of paper, I'll list this first, but it didn't answer your question very well if I did that, is around contact with the police. So 101, at the moment, the call times are nowhere near where they should be. There's a little bit of perception and reality in that as well, because you can get through to 101 if you call at the right time very quickly. Sometimes I'm presented with people who say 101, so you never get through, no point reporting anything. And I say, well, when did you try? And they say, well, I didn't actually try, but someone told me. Now that's a reality. That's where perception is reality. So I don't dismiss that. That is a reality I have to challenge. But it is also a fact that pure performance in itself won't change people's minds. We need to sell the message about it. About 20% of calls to 101 are someone asking for an update on their crime and what's happening. If we can automate some of that, not to force everybody down an automated channel for those who won't, but for those who can and want to. I've used the example of Amazon previously, not a universal service, but if your parcel is late from Amazon, you won't bring Amazon up. You won't expect to call in at the Amazon depot, find out where it is. You just look at the app on your phone and find out where it is. So if we can, with a bit of automation, enable you to log on to the TVP website and say, my crime number is this is my identifier, my crime is allocated to this officer, it's at this stage of the investigation. That will, one, take a chunk of calls out of the 101 queue, speeding things up for everybody else. I think many people these days would consider that's a better, easier service for them to use, because that's how we do all of our other stuff in life. And it would allow some slightly more frequent updates. You know, the officer in the case would love to phone you up to talk about your case, but he's on nights, so he's only able to ring you at 3 o'clock in the morning. You probably don't want to phone. And then when he's finished his shift at nights, he's got some rest days. So the 10 days when you hear nothing from the police officer dealing with your case feels like you've been ignored. The reality is they're just not there in office hours. These are all really minor things. I apologise, I'm diverting, but if we can move that online, that shifts a big piece, it enables communication. The big win for me is the next step, which is enabling better reporting online. So we've got the website, which is okay to report on, but I want to see a situation, there's some techie challenges around this, where you can report using WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger. You don't need to download an app, you just do it on the stuff you've already got on your phone. So if I've been a victim of crime, I will happily, not happily, the aberration, I will wait on 101 for half an hour because I've been a victim. I need to talk to someone, it's important to me, I'll make the time. If I've seen something in the car park that just doesn't look quite right, I might do the public spirited thing and ring up. If someone down the pub has told me it's going to take ages, doesn't put me off, I'll ring up. But actually after 5 minutes, you know, my public spirit run out a bit. And I can go to bed thinking I've tried to do my best. I tried, honest, but they didn't want to know about it. So I ring up. And then I probably haven't got the confidence to bother it next time either. If we can just make it so you can pick up your phone, take a picture, WhatsApp it to the police, and then you can automate some of that chat that comes with it afterwards to get information. I think we will increase the public's confidence that they can report things. I think we will gather a huge amount more information for the police to be able to deal with. Now, I had a conversation with someone about this earlier today. So, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to have enough officers to manage all that stuff that's coming in? But actually, a lot of it is intelligence. It's not a massive increase in crime reporting that needs a lot more attendance by police officers, but it's about the fact that that vehicle has been spotted by 3 of us now, and we've got some photographic evidence which is now on a police server somewhere that could be used. And we need to build expectations. It's not going to mean that when I WhatsApp that picture of the suspected drug dealer in the car park, someone turns up blue lights 2 minutes later, because there's no evidence of anything. But it does mean that the community officers that we're working to build the numbers of will actually have some really useful intelligence and a bit of evidence that they can start building those cases to do that preventative work. So a very long explanation for how I think we move from making public contact with the police easier by using the technology. It's going to take some investment, but I think it's really worth doing, because that's actually the bit where most people will have their contact with the public. It won't be with a police officer in uniform. Even if we had the 20,000 police officers all coming to Thames Valley, it wouldn't ever be with an officer in uniform. The presence is about building the numbers. It's about some hotspot policing, which is trying to get the balance around visibility. So if I use my nearest market town, Wantage, where I've got similar hitting coming up later in the week, some genuine issues, not dissimilar towns, Wantage and Buckingham actually, got some issues of low-level violence, antisocial behaviour, not a serious crime wave, but some things that are genuinely concerning. You know, people are concerned with good reason. Actually, having the local officers walking around on market day will go some way to reassure people, but it will do zero to eliminating crime, because on market day there's no crime in the marketplace. The issues will be at the same time up by the allotments. That's where the officers need to be. So they need to be on foot, they need to be visible, they need to do that proactive stuff. And they will be seen by people, and hopefully that will spread and provide some reassurance. But if they're up by the allotments, that's where the antisocial behaviour is. So that's where they need to be. So it's absolutely buying into the bit that everybody says, is that visible policing, preferably on foot, will make a difference. It will prevent crime. Yes, we need to be there, but tokenism about let's just put them somewhere where they'll be seen by lots of people to reassure. I get it, but I think we can be a bit smarter about how we do that, because if everybody in the town knows that they just get that feeling that antisocial behaviour is a bit lower than it was because the police are doing their job, and they've heard about that crime, but they also know that someone was arrested for it and the system works. That's, I think, the balance to get, because otherwise we could go completely the other way. We could have some high visibility patrols, which would really reassure people, but we'd lose a grip on what's actually going on. So that's my very long explanation. That's where we are.
So would you say that the fear of crime in this part of Thames Valley is greater than the reality?
I'm sure it is. In fact, I would say probably in all parts of most parts of the country. Actually, even where, and this is not, I'm conscious I'm lying here. This is not to be dismissive of anybody who's been a victim, because if you have been a victim of crime, clearly that's hugely impactful. But the vast majority of people in Thames Valley, over the next year, will not be a victim of crime. But that does that mean the vast majority of people don't care about crime or community? Of course not. Most people will be. Women being fearful of being out at night in the dark. Most women will never be a victim of male violence, thankfully, because they won't be victims of domestic abuse. They won't be victims, on a night out somewhere. But are they fearful of it? Yes. Should we take that seriously? Absolutely. Which is why we need to get the reality as well as the perception. We need to reassure people. An example of that actually around women in the nighttime economy, particularly, we've got an operation called Operation Vigilant. Works in the nighttime economy, plainclothes officers working with uniformed officers to spot predatory male behaviour outside nightclubs, pubs, etc. Spot those men who are perfectly sober, hanging around outside the club, looking for the lone females leaving who perhaps are inebriated, perhaps they've been separated from a group of friends, following them for a bit, offering them a lift home, all that sort of stuff that just doesn't sit right. Not committing any offences at that stage, but police officers, especially trained, looking for that behaviour and then calling in the uniformed officers to go and make an approach, potentially arrest, depending on what they've got. We've found that it's a really successful operation. It's uncovered some very disturbing people out there, which is good that they've been uncovered. We found that the reassurance element worked really well for parents of those young people who were out, because they would watch the 6 o'clock BBC News, which is where we've got lots of coverage of it, and they would see that sort of stuff and think, oh, well, we know the police are doing that, etc. The 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old young women at university or are sort of post-school age in out in work, they weren't getting their news from those outlets. So they weren't getting the protections there. They were objectively safer. They didn't feel any safer because they had no idea the police were doing this. So we've engaged with a woman, Sharon Gafka, who was on Love Island. For people who watch that sort of thing, I feel like a high court judge sometimes when I talk about this sort of stuff. So I'm led to believe. Sharon's brilliant. She actually lives not too far from me. She's doing some work with the force to help us raise the profile of that operation and other things on social media, because I can do, the sorts of people I talk to on social media are John. Lovely though you are, John. You're not the sort of person I need to talk about that subject. Same with the force, frankly. Whereas Sharon has hundreds of thousands of followers of young men and women of exactly the target audience. So they're the people we need to be targeting. Which is that point, sorry, you were in a very roundabout way again, you were talking about reassurance and the perception.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Harvey.
Just to respond briefly to what you said, thank you. That's a very good explanation and a very coherent and comprehensive explanation of what you're doing. And I think it's great that this meeting has been recorded, because people can now listen to you say that, and maybe gain a greater understanding of the complexity of all of this, because there are no simple solutions, and it isn't just about putting out more high-vis, jackets in various places. It's much more complex than that. I think the only thing I would sort of challenge back is a couple of things. One is, I think more communication needs to happen about this in simple ways. People can actually grasp just what the challenge really is for the police service in terms of tackling people's sense of having a police presence, as it were. Yeah. And secondly, I would say, I campaigned for the 1999 Crime and Disorder Act, and it should include a measure of fear of crime. And maybe one thing that would help spur some of your changes that you're trying to put in place is maybe some way of measuring the fear of crime in terms of other. Because if we have that even localized, then that begins to give you feedback on what you're doing is working or not working. Because without feedback, you won't know if it's working. So it's about putting in a kind of track of that is all I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you again. That was very
No, if I could just respond very quickly to that. So agree on comms. It is an emergent strategy. I've been working on a few bits in the background for a while. There's bits. It's a sort of thing that needs big fanfare to explain that thing. And I'm conscious I'm saying this in a public forum and it's being recorded, and that's absolutely fine because I'm not saying anything I wouldn't say to anybody else. But not unreasonably, people will say, well, when will that bit be live on the website, except where you can log in? Personally, before we do a lot of big communications around this, other than the general messages of reassurance I would talk about with more officers, etc., I think in order to do it justice, I want to have answers to all of that. And again, they're not simple answers. So I want to get all those ducks in a row, if you like, before I can say, this is the package, this is how it's going to land. Because I can't answer all those details at the moment. You're quite right about the fear of crime, and it is absolutely the crux of it. It's why the community policing bit is really important, and it's something, as you say, won't be solved by purely high-vis jackets. Numbers matter, but I only jest if the 20,000 police officers all came to Thames Valley, people would still say we never see a problem around here. There is some reality to that, actually, about what people's perceptions are. There's a survey about to go live on the OPCC website, which looks at people's experiences, generally have you been a victim of crime, etc., etc. We're trying to pick up some stuff in that about fear of crime as well. Now, I'm conscious that another survey from a public body, how easily that gets lost. My hope is we've taken some stuff from various other agencies out there who do similar things. So Buckingham Council, for example, do a community safety survey. Elsewhere in Buckinghamshire, there's the Cheltenham South Bucks Policing Forum. They do some stuff. What I'm hoping to do, not preventing anybody else doing their own survey, but I've tried to design it in a way that it's useful for everybody. So they will promote it, and we can get some data we can use across the whole of Thames Valley. Even if you've got a small sample size, we'll be able to say, well, in Buckingham, these are the responses we got from a very small sample. That's interesting, but isn't it also interesting that that compares like this to a similar town in Oxfordshire somewhere? Does that tell us anything? Might not. On specifics around safety and perception, there's a scheme called Street Safe, which was launched by the Home Office. You can access it through the Thames Valley Police website, where you can report places that you don't feel safe. Slightly different what you're talking about, I know it's helpful, I think. So you can say, well, actually, the car park back here, it's a bit dark and dingy. It just feels a bit bad. There's some antisocial behaviour there. So you're not reporting crime, you're reporting places and problems. That then gets fed back into the police and community safety partnerships. So it might be actually the answer is the council needs to put some street lighting in there. It's not a policing problem, it's a lighting problem or whatever. So there's that opportunity. We're also working with YouGov, who make all their survey stuff commercially available. I'm hoping we can get some of their data, which gives that idea about confidence. Confidence in policing is different from fear of crime, but there are some parallels. So I'm looking at what data we can buy from them, because again, a much larger sample, independently sourced. So it's not me relying on a survey, so that we can use some of that data to evaluate what we're doing and how effective.
Thank you very much. Was there anything else you wanted? You came here burning to tell us about?
Hearing from me. The main bit actually I wanted to talk to you about was that whole community policing strategy, which I've given you at great length in answer to one of the questions. I guess it might just be relevant. We mentioned knife crime earlier. It probably is worth mentioning off the term because it is something I'm very passionate about. We launched this in July this year. 3 parts to it again. Tougher operational approach. Some investment in early intervention for young people, particularly as part of the pilot in Milton Keynes, but if successful, hopefully we can find some funding to roll it out elsewhere, and some better messaging. In essence, it's about doing things quickly. Swift justice matters. It's been a bit of a challenge with some getting magistrates on board with some elements of it. But as an example of where this can work really well, last week in Slough, there was a gentleman, I use the term loosely, who was stopped on a train going to Slough by British Transport Police suspected of drug dealing. He had drugs on him, and he has what's commonly known as a zombie knife, a big knife on him. He was handed over to Thames Valley Police, who are now operating on this model in Slough. We're rolling it out everywhere, but Slough is one of the areas that's got it. So, using Cllr, slightly different methodology. He was arrested. He was charged. He was remanded same day, remanded overnight to appear before the magistrates the next day. And he pleaded guilty because we put all that stuff together. Why wouldn't you plead guilty in those circumstances? It makes it really difficult. And we've got magistrates on board. So he pleaded guilty, went through the magistrates and sentenced the same day, 40 weeks in prison. Some people will say, well, it's not long enough, but actually I think in the current climate for possession offences, so nobody on that occasion, nobody was hurt by anything he did. He didn't commit any other offences other than being executive of things he shouldn't have been. 40 weeks in prison, I don't think is a bad sentence in the scheme of things. And that swift justice of you're there, you're arrested, you're overnight in the cell, you're in front of the magistrates, and you're off prison. That I think it's called off deter. Hopefully, that does in itself not just deter some of those individuals from reoffending because they feel there is a penalty, but offer some wider deterrent because you've got to have that certainty. All those penalties that are there in law, you've got to have some certainty they're actually going to be enacted. And I think as far as sending a message to those people who will carry knives, some are bent on criminal intent and won't stop until they're caught. But with knife crime, there is a cohort of young men particularly who carry knives almost as a cultural point that we need to tackle. They don't necessarily intend to hurt anybody. They don't necessarily intend to commit crime. They'll say it's for their own protection or it's showing off to their friends or their girlfriend or whoever it is. We need to stop that. And I think the most effective way of stopping it is by showing you've got a knife on you, you're going to go to prison. And that's what we're stopping.
Very much. I know there was an old saying, justice delayed is justice denied, and that's something that goes against that. I'm conscious of the time, and the councils have had the opportunity to send in questions in advance, but I will just take Councillor Marby now.
Thank you, welcome. Just a point that you made about this incident that happened in Slough for 40 weeks. How many of those weeks will you really spend?
A fair point. Sadly, in the great empire of police and crime commissioner, the courts and the justice system are not all part of my remit. But we work with the tools we've got, and I think in the scheme of things, I'll say when we start, it's a pretty good place. There is a point, though, I suppose, about the perception and reinforcing that separation for all the right reasons of why policing should be separated from the judiciary and the independence of both. But for most people, they will see the police, and if they then hear of a sentence that they think is unduly lenient, they think it's the police. They blame the police for the lack of sentencing. It has nothing to do with the police. It never has been, never will be, thankfully. But we need to explain that to people in order to give the police a fair hearing on what they're doing, because they can do absolutely everything right. They don't always, but they can do absolutely everything right, and it still goes wrong somewhere else. And we just need to place the blame where it lies.
Well, thank you very much for coming this evening. We do appreciate it, and you've given a very good explanation of the way things are and why they are as they are. And I'm sure we would all want to thank you for your time this evening and for the work you do, and our best wishes for the future and implementing some of the strategies that you've outlined.
Thank you. I'll be back again soon when I come here.
You're very welcome to stay, but I realise you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you. Item 4 is bleed kits, which I guess is quite relevant to what we've just been hearing about. And we do have a report from Parliament on that. And the recommendation from that report is that a one-off payment of £400 be given to the Bletchley Lions Club to pay 50% of the cost of purchasing 10 league kits, and it's indicated in the report where those would go. And I think most of us were here when the Bletchley Lions came and made their presentation, and I think that was quite well received from us. Councillor Stuchbury.
For you, Madam Mayor, that we do that. The explanation was quite poignant and quite fluid in the sense of what's happened recently since they've come to visit us. So it was very timely. So I'm happy to propose that we agree 400%.
We second it. Shall we just move straight to a vote? Yeah. Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And then the next item, Councillor Stuchbury has put forward the motion that Buckingham Town Council seeks an early meeting with the appropriate Buckinghamshire Council officers to obtain the maximum information relating to future development plans for Buckingham. Key areas include, but are not limited to, housing numbers, highways development infrastructure and education provision as they relate to the revised Buckingham neighbourhood plan. Any such plans need to be drafted in a robust and legal manner, thus recognising and being capable of informing future decisions by Buckingham Town Council. And that motion has been seconded by Councillor Cole.
Can I speak to it?
Yes, sure.
As a dyslexic, the mayor's read it out for me because she didn't believe I could read. Well, thank you very much. The motion and the content of it is contained, and the reason for it is contained in the appendix. It's never more evident to us that we've got a neighbourhood plan to put together. It's important that everybody in our community can see that this council is involved and this council influence. If you read the attachments and the questions which have been consecutively asked over a long period of time, driven through work with my colleague, Councillor Mark Cole, and the planning committee, trying to seek clarity, seek understanding, and trying to move this conversation forward. It's untenable that we would be in a situation where we wouldn't be partners in discussing this. Now, we have asked for this to be discussed at Buckinghamshire Council, and the responses are a written and public record. So I'm not quoting anything that isn't actually been questioned before. The questions lead us to a conclusion that Buckingham is a large community which has a history of producing a neighbourhood plan, has a history of trying to do the right thing, and has many important questions to answer. But without full engagement and full disclosure and full partnership, even on an officer level, we will do what we did last time, get partway through a plan, only to find out that it isn't in conformity. It isn't in keeping with what Buckinghamshire Council's aspirations are on the legal term. And then we would end up using public money twice. We've had experience of this, those of us who were involved in putting together the previous plan. So I hope this is a simple matter of agreeing it. And I hope that this would be easily discussed and agreed. And I'll speak at the end when I hear your views.
Thank you, Councillor Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I endorse everything that Councillor Stuchbury said, which is why I'm seconding this. I think this council needs to realise what a debt we owe to Robin. The number of times he has raised written questions right across the board at Buckinghamshire Council, and for that we are most indebted, and also, of course, to our other ward councillors who also raised questions about the same thing. But we want Buckinghamshire Council to look at its towns and parishes charter, which it published as a document, which it said it should be following, and we should be involved in everything. And at the moment, we do appear to be cut out of that. This is why this motion is so important tonight.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor White and Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. I was quite surprised to see this motion on the agenda tonight, because it raises a number of issues that have never been brought to me as one of the Buckinghamshire Council ward members. And if there are difficulties in contacting the right highways people, education department and whatnot, then surely conversations with the ward member would be a good place to start. This feels like it's creating a problem that doesn't seem to exist yet. And I have raised this before in other parts of the town council where the planning committee do seem to go off on a tangent and do not speak to the Buckinghamshire Council ward members. And that is unfortunate because I think this is a self-inflicted situation. And that is disappointing. In fact, with this motion coming to council tonight, Council Secretary made no effort to contact me, and I doubt he contacted my colleague about the problems he apparently has. Now, when I was planning chair of this town council, we did indeed do a neighbourhood plan, and we became a government front-running council with that neighbourhood plan. And we didn't have to write motions to talk to the council about getting the right paper. We had civil conversations. We wrote to the right people, and the data came, and we had a plan that was in force until that came out last year. So I'm not going to vote for this motion because I think this is a political motion. I think it's trying to make a situation that does not exist yet. And I think better use of our ward councillors needs to be made.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I didn't read that motion, I wasn't too sure what it was seeking to achieve. That I think it was trying to achieve. Council Stuchbury is on that. I think it's very local, right? And I don't think we've spoken about any difficulties with contacting any of the Buckinghamshire officers. I think we can. I have always been a promoter of collaboration with Buckinghamshire Council. I think this difficulty that the planning committee may be facing might be appropriate for ward council to take this off and find out what exactly is required, what information is needed. I know there's a local plan currently being designed by the Buckinghamshire Council, and if that's where the difficulties come in, then I think it's something that all councils can cooperate on, and contributions from the Buckinghamshire Town Council can also be included in there. But to go by way of motion, calling for a meeting, and with no specific officer being named, I think it's quite vague. I think that's one of my concerns about the motion. It's a vague motion addressed to Buckinghamshire Council asking to have meetings with whoever it is, no specific person. It will be difficult for anybody who gets this motion to actually identify who exactly it's been addressed to. And on that,
Do we have anybody else wanting to speak or Council Cole would want to respond to?
I'll respond to this. Well, firstly, as a Buckinghamshire Council, all of you are quite capable of reading minutes and questions at Buckinghamshire Council. As a Buckingham Town Councillor, you get the agendas, and no meeting is closed to any member attending, partaking, and being involved. This motion isn't about consulting ward members and Buckinghamshire Council. I've done what you've exactly asked me to do, or inciting should be done. I've done exactly what the tenure is. I've sat in meetings, listened to discussions, took actions forward as requested, which is a public record, and all the questions are laid down, and you've seen them all if you've read your Buckinghamshire Council minutes, your planning minutes, your cabinet minutes, your broken environment minutes. They're all there. All my actions have been in the public domain, and I keep a reasonably good Facebook page so that they can actually be recounted and whatever. So nothing's been done behind closed doors. If you joined in and asked similar questions, I would accept the challenge to the motion. And the motion is not political, it's in any way, shape, and form, and I detract from that. The Buckingham Town Council Planning Committee is an independent body that has a right to be consulted about what it wants to do. It doesn't have to actually ask permission of any councillor, myself included. And it must be able to determine its own view and be able to make its own actions possible. So they can vote the motion down, they can put it forward. Now, I work very closely with the chair of the planning committee on the wording of this motion, and I delayed the placing of this motion for good reason. It was going to be placed earlier. Circumstances naturally didn't tend themselves, and I found it was appropriate to leave a good amount of time between that event and this event to place the motion. I really regret comments that it's it's made political. In fact, by saying those comments, it's made it political. And in which case, it says itself, I'm fear that we are on a long road, and this isn't about challenging, and you don't, for information, it's not good practice for a councillor to name individual officers in correspondence. Officers cannot, should not be so cited in a meeting as the person they work and employees of the council. And so you don't do that. And that's why they're not naming them in the motion. If you read the correspondence and who the questions addressed, which are a public form and are answered, and it's a written form. It's a protocol which I would respect. I could have done that, but then I would have quite rightly been challenged by the clerk for not actually doing it, so I didn't do it. So in that case, I propose that we have a recorded vote and we move to the vote.
What's wrong with 3 minutes? I think the issue here has been about communication, and I know Councillor Osborne raised this at a previous meeting, and I think communication is key. We're having our negative plan, so is Buckinghamshire Council. So anyway, we'll move to a vote. Those in favour of the motion proposed by Councillor Stuchbury and seconded by Councillor Cole, please show.
Just do this.
Oh no, recorded vote was being
I asked for it, and I
Asked for it, but nobody seconded it.
I'll second that.
Therefore, no, I didn't see it. Agree for a recorded vote?
well, it doesn't matter, it's all public
Second
record.
it?
Yes,
No, they're not. If a recorded vote is called, it has to be seconded before the vote is taken. We've taken a vote, and therefore it cannot be recorded.
Get the standing orders out, please.
Are you chair now, are you?
I'm asking as the proposal of the motion.
Deputy Clerk is checking this one.
You need to let the mayor chair the meeting.
We have a bit of an impasse here, I think, regardless of.
Sorry.
You found it, or?
No, it's in here, but I will just give you a second.
I just wonder whether a way forward would be, as has been pointed out, whether or not we have a recorded vote. It is being recorded on our YouTube channel anyway. Whether that you wouldn't accept that, Councillor Stuchbury.
I think it's perfectly reasonable that council stands at the council that Councillor Morgan's quoted standing orders. I think it's quite reasonable before we take a decision to be sure that we are acting within standing orders. And if Councillor Morgan is right, he was correct, and if he's wrong, he's wrong. And then in which case we can proceed.
I really think the other chair, because you take the vote. It's the recording of the vote can tell how many people voted for it, and people voted against it, and how many people abstained anyway, without having the necessary necessity to go to a recorded vote. I think it's been Charles Abbott actually interpreted the 1972 local government.
So in our standing orders, it doesn't say that it needs to
Doesn't say.
be seconded.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we can call for a recorded vote in that case. So those in favour of the motion, please show. Well,
You get voting, you get the answer.
Well, no, it's a recorded vote.
we didn't, the vote wasn't counted before, so we didn't, that wasn't an appropriate vote.
In a massive photograph, I'll vote for it.
All right, so we have councillor Blakey. Councillor Stuchbury. Councillor Mahi. Councillor Ralph. Councillor Ahmed. Councillor Henderson. Councillor Harvey, apologies, can't see very well. Councillor Davies, Councillor Willett, Councillor Cole, and
And those against? Those abstaining?
so none against, and then abstaining, we have Councillor Morgie, Councillor Troy, Councillor Osborne, and Councillor Wright.
Thank you very much for that. Motion is passed. Item 6, Councillor White has declared an interest in this item. It's the reply from Mr. Greg Smith in relation to the correspondence regarding Maids Morton 3 phase 3 development. I'm sure we've all read that. Then Councillor Harvey.
I was simply saying no, I mean, obviously it's part of the story or whatever, but good to see that our MD has taken up the casuals
Indeed.
and is trying to make something. So
Thank you.
good.
Are we happy to receive and note that?
Agree.
Recommendation? Thank you very much. So moving on to item 7, ward boundary changes. We've received a report from the meeting that was held last week. And the suggested response is in this document. And the suggestion is we discuss and agree the recommended response to the local government boundary commission consultation undertaken and as agreed by the ward boundary working group. Did anybody want to speak to that or ask any questions? Councillor Morgan.
Say that there is a meeting of the Standards Board and the Boundaries Commission Working Group on Thursday, which I'll convey whatever the result of this meeting is. Because it's important you inform the Standards Board, you support whatever you say, as well as write direct to the Boundaries Commission.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, our thanks go to the people who participated in this consultation as well. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I wasn't there for the whole meeting, but I'm happy with the way it ended up. We obviously discussed around various, options and so on during the rose out. And yeah, I think full councillors for the area that they've delineated makes the most sense. In my view, is 3 councillors for the parish of Buckingham and then 1 councillor covering the rest. But perhaps 4 was the best way of doing it. So a bit similar to what we've got. So yeah, so I agree with this.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on that, or shall we vote on the consultation then? Those in favour of the response outlined in the document, please show. Those, you got that? And those against? No, nobody against. Any abstentions?
2 abstentions.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to item 8, Chair's announcement. I would like to request that anybody who's allowing one of the town council high visibility jackets, inadvertently or otherwise,
Don't look at me, Robin, I'm sorry.
can you please return them to the office as soon as possible, because they're needed for the Remembrance Day parade, which is coming up on Sunday, I think.
Yep.
So if you just check if you think you might be guilty of that, because we were short on Saturday. The other thing, there's been some discussion about having some kind of Christmas social, and I think it's been agreed at the end that maybe if we go for a drink, possibly at the Grand Junction after full council, which is on the 28th of November. And if anybody, it's obviously not compulsory, but it'd be lovely if many people as possible can come to that. That would be good. And the dates of the next meetings, full council on the 28th, as I've already said, and interim council on Monday, the 9th of January 2023. It's scary that we're already looking at 2023. We thank you for your attendance and participation this evening. And that's this meeting dealt with, and we'll reconvene this planning as soon as possible.